BMCR stands for Black Methodist for Church Renewal. It was organized in 1967 and 68 as the United Methodist Church was being formed. Black Methodists from all across the Methodist tradition were gathering, being concerned that this new denomination that was being formed and about to take birth would live into its idea of being God's beloved community. And blacks wanted to make sure that the matters of racism, the treatment of people, would be on the forefront of this new denomination. And so they gathered and began to strategize how to help this new faith family live into all that it said it was promising to do. So BMCR comes into existence really, as we say, Black Methodists for Church Renewal. It wasn't Black Methodists for the advancement of black people. It was not Black Methodists for can we get an equal shake. It was really about how to help this church, a faith tradition, be renewed. Yep.
So when you think about what brought us together in between 67 and 68, you know, it was the Methodist South. It was a central jurisdiction where blacks had been segregated. And then you had the Evangelical Brethren Church. And so there was this dynamic tension of what was going to happen with black folks as we came into this new faith tradition as the United Methodist Church. And part of that was in 67, blacks organized in Cincinnati and began to look at what is it that we want as we are leaving this segregated section and moving into a United Methodist Church. And so there was lots of discussion about what they expected at that General Conference of 1968. And so for black folks, it was very important that the whole issue of racism was dealt with. And so for one of the things that happened out of that uniting was the fact that we needed something like a G Corps. We needed folks to be in general secretary positions. We needed black staff in all of the agencies. And so that there were some very specific kinds of things that were asked for as we were joining. Methodist South weren't necessarily on board with what was happening, but the EUBs really pushed and said, we want this to happen. We were not going to come into a new faith tradition with it still being segregated. And so I think that's part of our history as we move forward. And so for us, it is very important that folks understand that as you look at Black Methodists for Church Renewal, when you look at it in this day and age, it is still relevant. We're still dealing with the issue of racism. More so than, equally so in terms of what's happening in our denomination, what the struggles are in the denomination. And so for us, we still see ourselves as very relevant, and it's very important when we gather, we remind folks that those issues that we were dealing with in 68 are still very prevalent. And if you look at the world as it is today, it is very much important that we deal with that. We were looking at the United States during that period of time. We have now begun to look at the whole diaspora in terms of what's happening. Because if you look at what happens at General Conference, how sometimes they try to separate us from one another, but we understand the fastest growing churches in Africa and in the Philippines. And so we want to be in solidarity with our sisters and brothers throughout the diaspora as we look at black folks and what's happening with black folks around the world.
All right. If we were to talk about what Black Methodist for Church Renewal means right now, there's a commitment by the caucus to say that we are raising up prophetic voices that will advocate for the unique needs of black persons in the Methodist tradition. And so we are committed at every level of the church, from the local church level to certainly districts, to conferences, to jurisdictions, and then certainly as a global church, that the unique needs of blacks who are a part of this faith tradition are heard and advocated for, affirmed, that when necessary we would agitate so that those needs are lifted up, dealt with, and not swept under the rug. So I think it's important to recognize that Black Methodists for Church Renewal is one of the 5 racial ethnic caucuses that is officially recognized by the United Methodist Church, written into the discipline as one of the 5 racial ethnic caucuses. So it is important to say that the organization, the United Methodist Church, has said, we value you because you are written and recognized as one of the 5 racial ethnic caucuses that needs to speak into the life of our church. I think that's an important point, that the parent organization is saying to these 5 racial ethnic caucuses, you have value, we recognize that, and we invite you to be part of the conversation. I think it's important that the 5 racial ethnic caucuses hold tension on that, to say, yes, you recognize us, and yes, you provide sort of a status for us, but also we must be able to speak back to you to make sure you hold to the truths that are written as part of the fabric of the United Methodist Church. When you talk about it in your founding document that you're going to eradicate racism, the racial ethnic caucus have to say, officially recognized. We get to talk back to you and hold tension on that and to say when you're doing it right and when you're falling below the mark. So I think it's very important, though, we recognize that these caucuses are in our discipline and by structure acknowledged, recognized, valued, and therefore the caucuses need to make sure they own their part of holding tension and holding steady the marching orders that came out of 1968's unifying conference.